But for now, we're going to have to turn to other matters, other challenges. I'm going to invite our panelists to come to the fore here. And I'd just like to say to Michael, who's popped a question into the Q&A, that the data that the department was gathering, I know, was covering people movements and freight movements to some extent. And we did know something of what was happening with lorries and, of course, vans and van deliveries. I can't go into any detail on that, but I'm sure that Darren Capes will be able to pick that up when he comes on shortly. Meantime, I'm going to start with the first of the provocations to ask our panelists to respond to some thoughts that certainly have been troubling my mind at this difficult time. And we've all been thinking over the last few days about how transport technology can make things better. But the cold hard fact is we are in the middle of a pandemic. We have a climate crisis, and we have a really difficult set of global issues. And the question in my mind is, how much time should we really be spending thinking about transport technology? Is this really going to help us find our way out, or is this actually something of a sideshow? So I'm going to ask Darren Capes, who's with us from the DFT, Jennie Martin from ITS, and I'm going to ask Alistair Hunter from Arup what they think about that. They're our panelists this afternoon, and I'm going to start with Jennie. Ladies first. Jennie, this transport technology, is it really going to be the way out of our problems, or is it something of a sideshow and we ought to just pause for the time being, crack on with getting the vaccines sorted out, and crack on with getting carbon sorted out so that we don't all drown as the oceans rise around us? What do you think?
So, since I'm from ITS United Kingdom, the Society for People Who Work with ITS, it won't be a surprise to hear that, of course, I think we should carry on with transport technology. When I first saw the reference to what's the point, we're all going to drown, I thought it's sort of the transport technology equivalent of saying, of course I shall have a patio heater, because look at the Chinese with all their oil-fired power stations. So, and that's not a helpful attitude. So I would put that to one side straight away. There's always going to be transport. It would probably look quite different in 10, 20 years to what it does now, but we will always have it. I firmly believe that the human race will drown rather than give up traveling. It's such a strong human need, not just an economic need, but also a human need. And we here in our little sector of transport technology, we need to play our part. And I think if you look back on what we've already done in terms of, I mean, I wasn't driving around in the 60s, despite some people probably think I was, but how much better things now are. Look at our road safety record, absolutely fantastic compared to how it used to be. Look at what we've done with emissions. Yes, I mean, the situation is not as it should be, but if transport technologists hadn't chipped in and started using what they were already using for traffic control in order to mitigate air quality, we'd be far worse, particularly in our city centres. So absolutely resounding yes from me. We must carry on doing what we're doing, just do it better, and just make sure year on year as policy objectives and strategies change, we follow them, because we should follow, where we're a democracy, we should follow what the government wishes us to do. We shouldn't be setting the agenda, but we should be delivering it. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Jennie. And I'm going to come to Alistair next, because Alistair, one of the things about the transport technology is that we think of it as maximising the efficient use of the capacity we've got. We've got some big projects coming along. We've been talking about Lower Thames Crossing and all of that sort of thing. But we've been trying to squeeze the most out of the road capacity we've got. But some would say we shouldn't be squeezing the most out of it. We should be constraining traffic. Why on earth do we want to enable more people to be driving around when we've got a climate emergency? Is the traffic technology that TTF members are developing and deploying helping with the right problem?
Oh, it's a fascinating question, isn't it? Because you know, if you look at schemes like Lower Thames Crossing that are going through the hopper at the moment, that in broad terms, there's about a 50% in terms of a carbon bill. About half of it comes from the build over a 60-year period, and half of it comes from the sort of operation side of it, as in the road user. And you know, it does spark into sort of question whether we can go through the unconstrained demand in terms of sort of vehicle miles on the network. So there's about, I think it's around about 300 billion vehicle miles are travelled on the network in the UK each year, and there is a question where you start to think that, you know, regardless of almost how clean the electric vehicle technologies are, there's got to be some kind of natural limit where we say, you know, there's got to be some sort of demand management lever. And if you think about that, then traditionally there's a whole range of measures, but one of which is mobility pricing of some form or another, and that comes with a whole host of challenges as well, of course. So we are in a kind of strange situation where, you know, on one hand you've got the sort of promises of electric vehicles, and they certainly look better, don't they, from a carbon perspective, but they're not perfect. The flip side is that if that makes transport even cheaper in the long term, then you induce more demand. So I think it's a complex question. I think it's a complex answer, and my personal view is that we will need to move to some sort of demand management, national demand management, which is underpinned by a sort of accessible and robust technology. So and if you do that, then you can justify big schemes like Lower Thames Crossing, because you can say holistically as a system we're getting into a kind of more sustainable place, particularly with the sort of change of the fleet over the next 10-20 years to electric and possibly hydrogen if it's for the heavy vehicles perhaps. I think there's I read I don't know if people on the call kind of read this on the Beeb website this last weekend. There was an article about Bitcoin, and it uses this blockchain technology for any transaction. That if you're selling or trading Bitcoins, you're buying something, you're selling something, the amount of computing power required to process that transaction is absolutely vast, and that's the kind of security of it, if you like, is underpinned by that. And it estimated, I don't know whether this is true, but the academics think that the amount of energy required for the Bitcoin economy at the moment uses about the same amount of energy as the Netherlands. Okay, so this, and why do I say that? Because why do I bring that into this discussion? Because more and more of the sort of connected vehicles technologies are using or will use cloud-based technology, and the impact of that energy usage could potentially be huge as the fleet ramps up, and we're kind of only just waking up really to the cost of the carbon cost of all this computing power. So the technology, you can see a world where it absolutely is fundamental to limiting, managing, but still enabling sort of social equality and people to get to where they need to get to. The flip side is there are some unintended or unseen consequences that are coming from this hugely computationally intensive kind of world that we're moving into. So I'll pause there, Steve.
It's time for me to bring in Darren. So Darren, you've spent, I would say, the greater part, shall we say, of your professional life trying to cope with the morning peak. You've been trying to help us get where we need to get to at the point when we all want to get there at the same time. Absolute nightmare for anyone dealing with traffic, and technology could help us with that, and we spend a lot of time thinking about traffic control systems, but neither of us has been into our office for many months. Shouldn't we just spend our energies persuading people to work from the slippered luxury of our homes rather than adding to people's traffic and emissions problems by encouraging them, frankly, to make trips that, well, perhaps don't really need to be made?
I think yes. I think absolutely. I think both for carbon transport, for urban road networks, for the bus and train industry, then having a very peaky day, having most of the demand within an hour and a half in the morning is very inefficient. And I think we look at what's happened in the last year, and we look at building back better. And I think there are things that have happened that we would want to preserve. And while I don't think I would want to move to a permanent a situation where I never leave this room for work purposes, which has been the case for the last 12 months. I think a situation where I travel less, where I travel off peak, where we all maybe try and get on the road at times it's not so busy, or on trains at times when we can get a seat, traveling to the office 2 or 3 days a week. I think that would be a much more sensible solution. And certainly as a highway operator, that would allow us to think a lot more sensibly about how we allocate road space, about how we maybe bake in some of the measures that we've seen in the cities around cycle use and around pedestrian use and wider footways and how we get away from dealing with that morning peak. I think there's a health warning around this utopia of let's all travel less in the morning peak, and that's that we have pretty effectively configured the business model for our road and for our bus and rail networks around doing that. And actually the business model for running buses and trains in the way that we have in the past sort of breaks down if you don't have that very intense travel in and out of cities. That's what a lot of rail and bus provision is predicated on. And so we will, one of the challenges will be we will need to find a new way of running buses and trains, and we will need to find a new business model for how they operate. Now again, and it's interesting that it's only in the last few decades that the rail network has been primarily about shifting people into cities. It's if you think back 30 or 40 years, the peak time on the rail network was Saturdays and Sundays, and the railways were much more heavily used for leisure and off-peak travel than for commuting. So maybe we need to look back into history. Maybe we need to move to a network where actually that's what we do more with these networks. Maybe we promote that more. Maybe that's the future. Maybe the way in which public transport forms a part of mobility as a service solutions and the way that we price and pay for public transport encourages that. But we will need to have a fundamental review of the business models that underlie all forms of transport if we move away from that very sort of Twin Peaks graph of daily transport.
So is that, Darren, is that the way that your colleagues now in the Department of Transport are thinking about this? Because the sense that I have from various ministerial pronouncements, including our Prime Minister, make me think that what he really wants is for us to write off the last 12 months and get back to where we're supposed to be, which for you and me is in an office in London. I'm sure both of us from 8 in the morning till 7 at night. Busy typing away and then getting on a commuter train, and I'm just not sure that the conversation about what recovering from COVID should be like is encompassing the scale of change that you just said.
I think there's a very strong policy tension here, and obviously the Treasury can't be expected to go around writing 30 billion pound checks for forever. There is a very strong desire to get the economy working again, to start to pay back some of the deficit, to start to get people back into employment, and that includes people that work in city centres, sandwich shops and bars and restaurants. There's a very strong desire to get us back to normal, I think, to try and get the economy bouncing back as quickly as it can, and that's quite correct. We should be trying to do that. I think our job as transport professionals is to try and inject into that headlong rush to normality a sense of, well, there are some good things here that we really should be thinking about, and actually in the process of trying to kickstart the economy, we should be trying to kickstart it into a slightly different economy from the one that collapsed a year ago. And actually, yes, that is difficult for people who work in Subway and in shops in the city centre. That will be difficult, but that's maybe something we need to be thinking about. There's a real need, I think, to ensure that we do build back better. We don't just have the headlong rush back to where we were.
Thank you. Okay, well, look, I want to come back to Jennie for a moment here. So when we've been thinking about, often when we think about the Transport Technology Forum and the sort of technologies we're talking about, I would say we almost inevitably come back to thinking about cars. After all, we use our cars a great deal. Cars account for the vast majority of trips that we make. We've got very used to using them. But in a world where ministers, where local elected officials are far more interested, perhaps in encouraging what we call active travel, enabling people to make local trips. I'm thinking of the Mayor of Paris and the famous 15-minute city. Is that something that is really relevant to the TTF, or is that something that's happening over there? We'll just focus in on the traffic lights and default to green for the cars, and sustainable travel that's somebody else's initiative, somebody else's problem. What's the ITS UK view on that?
Thank you for that, because it gives me a chance to say that ITS UK has just started a new active travel forum, which also, for the time being at least, includes micromobility. I think definitely anybody like the Transport Technology Forum or any other body in that area should definitely be including active travel and micromobility going forward, because surely what we want to arrive at is using the correct mode for the correct trip, as it were. And I'm not falling in the trip of saying that, oh, well, if you're only going half a mile to drop your child off at school, you know, if you're driving, that's wrong, because who knows what you're doing afterwards. Maybe you're going off to get heavy shopping or to take your granny to a doctor's appointment or whatever. But in principle, all the modes should be given a fighting chance, as it were. And I think there with technology definitely has a role to play, because you know, you include data and information and ticketing and booking services and what have you for active modes and micromobility modes into, Darren talked about mobility as a service, into hubs that you're organising, into intelligent ticketing that you're doing. That's obviously really helpful and really important. But there is also something in there for our infrastructure brethren who aren't here, but who we should talk to all the time. And that's along the lines of, just because something is only half a mile doesn't necessarily mean it's walkable. Even if you're able-bodied, it might be so darned uncomfortable, dangerous seeming, unpleasant in every way, that you don't want to do it, so you drive instead. So there's a dialogue there between us and the people who work in civils and transport planning, etc., etc. But absolutely, the short answer to the question is yes, of course we must include them. That's all about thinking about, again, going back to what Darren said, we don't want it to be 2019 again any more than I mean, again, I wasn't there, you'd be surprised to hear, but in 1945, 1946, I'm sure people weren't sitting around going, oh, how can we make it be 1939 again? They weren't, and we should be grateful to them that they didn't do that, because British society is better as a result of it. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny. And I guess there's always a tendency, isn't there, to think the future is just going to be a slightly different coloured version of the past that we're all used to. And yet all three of you are, to an extent, seeing a future that has potentially quite profound implications for the way people work and the way that travel systems are organised. Alistair, as someone who works in the consulting world, is that sense that the future has opportunity for doing things differently, living our lifestyles differently, and facilitating them differently, is that something that's coming through from your clients, from the people that you're engaging with? I worry that it's a tightly knit little bunch of folk who are having these thoughts in a sort of hermetically sealed cocktail party discussion. Is it a broader discussion? Is it out there? What are people asking you guys?
I like the idea of a hermetically sealed cocktail party. It sounds quite good fun. I think on both the client side and if you like the consultancy world, there's a lot of guessing in a sense as to I hope you can hear me. There's a lot of guessing as to what kind of the future may hold, and also I don't think the big funding streams that enable the change have actually flipped over yet. So we are looking at specifically how transport funding, for example, may change much more into the urban space rather than the big strategic networks perhaps in the future. And so and the whole premise of that is, whilst there may be a shift to the smaller towns, as a post-pandemic sort of trend that we see, we think the opportunity for designing and living within a really highly configured sort of urban space that enables active travel, that is safe, that really makes a step change to a massive number of people. And there's some really interesting sort of comparisons there if you look at kind of the way the funding may go. So a big civils project on a motorway may cost 200, 300, 400, even even up to £1 billion quite easily if it's, say, one of the more complex smart motorways. M4 junction 3 to 12 springs to mind. And you think about how that sort of level of funding, if it was channeled into a urban context, an urban environment, the change that you could affect to the transport system, whether it's to smoother flowing sort of vehicles through sort of talking traffic types, options, or whether it's genuinely properly designed cycle paths that aren't just sort of painted on a footpath and quite awkward for everybody to use. So there's an awful lot of thinking. I think there's an awful lot of intent. There's a fair bit of guessing as well at the moment, and we're not yet seeing, although there are straight funding streams like the Transforming Cities Fund and the Towns Fund and those good things. We're not yet seeing the huge kind of diversion away from the network rails, from the Highways England, in terms of that sort of real spending power to the cities and towns necessarily. So I think we all recognise there's lots of opportunities there. I think it'll be a year or two before we see the real big things hit the ground. But I do hope, as a country, we take that opportunity to reset, because I think it's given us a great opportunity as to what the future may look like. So I'll stop there, Steve.
Sure, thank you. So Darren, I'm going to come to you next, so you might want to have your finger hovering over the unmute button. We've heard there's a moment of opportunity, you've said so yourself, but we are not just institutionally stuck sometimes into the silos of Transport Department and Ministry of Housing and all of that, but we have big established streams of money, like the grant that goes into Network Rail and the money that goes to Highways England. And then, of course, there's the endlessly entertaining cavalcade of competitions that we invite local authorities to bid for low numbers of millions. How would it be if we said there's a £2 billion jackpot to be had? So that will be the A14 plus half of Black Cat to Caxton Gibbet, right? And we said, bid for this and be the transformed city. You used to run a city. What would you transform?
Well, it's interesting that you say that, Steve, because I was lost in a bit of a reverie there, just thinking about Alistair's point of a few minutes ago. I was just trying to think what my former employer, City of York Council, would have done with £1 billion to spend on the transport network. I mean, if we could have basically moved York somewhere warmer, I would have thought, for £1 billion.
Well, that's the question. I mean, you could have moved York Minster a bit to the left.
Exactly.
If we'd been having this conversation 20 years, 25 years ago, I guarantee you the abiding thought would be in the city of York, well, we'll buy and knock down a whole bunch of these rotten old buildings. We'll rip up these cobblestones and we'll have some nice wide roads running through the city centre. Isn't the risk here that whatever the fashionable answer we've got in our minds now, we'll regret in 10 to 15 years' time?
I think it's hugely a risk. I think you've got to look at what previous generations did when money was splurged like that. And you think about Coventry Inner Ring Road, and you think about schemes like that. You think that's probably not where I want to go. And I was reading a book recently about the history of London and about some of the intentions after the war to bulldoze places like Covent Garden and turn them into multi-layer, segregated, traffic-free concrete hell, basically. And I think there is a danger that we need to not lose the character of our cities. We need to not lose the character of the way that the cities work, and we need to remember that transport very rarely is an end in itself. It's something that people use to do other things, and I think what we need to do is be thinking more about how we would use that money to manage that, and that may well be new national networks. It may well be about getting more freight on the railways. It may well be about working in cities. But I think the lesson we should learn from the past is that needs to be done with a degree of subtlety, and we need to recognise what our cities are and the value of them. And if we are going to cut down travel, it will be by building better communities and better neighbourhoods, not by building super high-tech, hyperloop type solutions, probably. I think it's also worth saying as well that if you step back from the kind of billions of pounds into the millions of pounds, if you think about giving millions and millions of pounds to cities to sort out their traffic technology, and that's what the TTF here to think about. I very much doubt if the industry that we have in the UK at the moment could deliver that. I think there is a huge problem of resource and capacity in industry, in the consultants as well, in local authorities. There simply are not enough people with the right skills around to spend a massive increase in funding. And if it takes a number of years for funding model to change and money to come into solving different things, then the thing we should be doing now to prepare for that is thinking about the resilience of the industry, the capacity, training, bringing the right people in, because that for me is where the problem will lie. The problem will lie in having enough people to do the types of stuff that need to be done.
Well, I think that's one I should turn to Jennie on. So coming off mute now, Jennie, is this developing the skills, not just developing the skills of people, but actually bringing more people in to the industry and then upskilling them? Is that something that's in the sights at ITS UK?
Yeah, absolutely. But I must also be even-handed and say not just ourselves. Anywhere where you have any sort of professional gathering, like the IIT, CIHT, CILT, etc., everybody very, very concerned about this. I think partly it's because we offer really interesting work in our sector, and the conversation we've had so far today, I think, proves that the work is going to get more interesting, and we're going to need a wider range of skills and expertise in order to deliver what we're going to need to deliver. But working in transport, if you are a really good programmer or a top-notch architect or the best geographer there ever was, we just don't sound inviting enough, and that's something we all need to really work on. There's the whole debate about what does the word engineer mean to people who aren't engineers and don't have engineers in the family. Often not I always quote other European countries. If you are a qualified chartered engineer, you put that in front of your name, so you're no longer Mrs. Martin, you're Inge Martin, and you're proud of it. We don't do that here. I think that speaks a lot of words. And we're also now, so the historic conception of it not being a very sexy, to use the old-fashioned term, place to work in, we are now also up against the fact that as getting a university degree, which is traditionally how we recruited our people, graduate entrance, I'm sure Arup has a fantastic scheme. In fact, I probably met some of the graduate entrants, and they're all great people. That's how we've been doing it for 20, 30 years. Well, the industry's only 30, 40 years old. Now, getting a university degree is becoming a really expensive thing to do. And if you're from a family background where huge debt isn't usually something that you're comfortable with, then the whole thing really does look quite unattractive. So we now, I think, also need to start really pushing the apprenticeship route and other ways of getting into the industry. So it's a really big challenge, but I really feel very strongly it's a challenge for all of us. If we are in the industry, it is part of our professional duty to support the people coming in behind us, and to all of us in all different ways acting as ambassadors for working in transport technology. We know it's a great place to work. We're here. We just need to get much better at sending out that message. And part of the message is, yes, say if you're an absolute IT wizard, you will earn a lot more money in the City of London writing programs for buying the coffee beans at exactly the right moment. But hey, where's the social good and where's the job satisfaction in that? Come and work in transport and do some good.
Thanks very much, Jennie. I have to say that my favourite boss in the civil service was very fond of saying that there is no more exciting and interesting sector to work in than transport. We literally cover everything from satellites above the planet to the depths of the oceans, and we affect everybody's life every day. I've always found it absolutely fascinating, and it throws up some fascinating conundrums. And one of them, I'm coming back to Alistair here, is the one that you just mentioned. We try to capture all of the costs and benefits in what we do. In the transport department, where Darren now sits, it's part of the warp and weft of life. We're much better at it when it comes to infrastructure schemes. We're perhaps still not good enough at it when it comes to the environmental impacts we have. But what about those vehicle problems you were talking about, the increasing sophistication of the vehicle and the increasing problems of of the electric draw, of the computing power needed for them? Is there an answer to that? And am I right in thinking now is the time to reinvent the Morris Minor?
Well, you might well be. I mean, I think the emerging challenge of the you know, as we talked about earlier, that data analytics hungry impact on the data centers and the resulting energy usage is huge, but emerging and not actually well understood at all. I think the automotive industry will keep on increasingly sophisticated systems as long as they think that's the answer in terms of more sales, I guess. So it's possibly a moot point or slightly a sort of utopian view as to whether the future Morris Minor is the way, you know, a lightweight, super efficient, super simple vehicle is you know, the answer. It may well be in an ideal world, but it won't happen, will it? As long as the car manufacturers think they get the edge on the other by offering some more advanced technology. I think there's and I was just looking, I don't know if other people have, maybe it's just since kind of lockdown that you become a bit more aware of the vehicles driving through your kind of local town, but the number of the massive Ford Ranger type pickup trucks that are trundling along, certainly where I live, is frightening. And I think there's a technology side, which maybe there's regulations around usage in terms of the sort of energy and carbon impact of that technology. That would be an interesting thing for government to explore, but also the actual just simple physics of it, of shifting a massive lump of steel, aluminium, whatever it is, around the network. And you know, you look at the Ford Rangers, and they've kind of got the front cabin, and then you've got another kind of car on the back where the pickup bit goes, if you like. And they're never full of stuff. They're rarely at capacity. So I think it is a generally, not always, but generally it's often a style thing rather than a need thing. And again, I kind of come back to whether there should be some sort of more explicit link in terms of taxation, however you kind of achieve it.
Okay, thanks, Alistair. We're running quite short of time now. We're going to wrap up at 2:35. I'm going to pose one more question and look for short answers to Darren and to Jennie. I'm going to come to Darren first. We started the week with that invitation from the guys at ASIN to have a more joined up conversation about the development of in-car tech and traffic tech. I think we were very enthusiastic about that. But do we think a bit less tech might be part of that conversation?
No, in a word. I don't think it will. I think more tech. I don't see any sector of commerce now where people want to buy less. People want to buy more. They want shinier, brighter, faster, quicker, whatever. I think more tech is the answer, but I think the way we deliver that tech needs to change. And I think to go back to Alice's point, it needs to move. What we don't want is an ever higher tech Ford Ranger. We want the package to be maybe low tech, simpler, lighter, to take account of the fact that increasing crash avoidance means we might not need so much steel in our vehicles in the future. But the level of tech, the level of integration, that's the thing I think in the future that will sell vehicles, and that's where we should be growing our capabilities while putting them into lighter, more efficient, cheaper packages, maybe.
Okay, thanks, Darren. And Jennie, I think I heard you saying earlier, so much of what we need to be doing is encouraging people to choose the right mode for the right trip. They've got to think about the trips they make. They've got to think about the modes. I don't imagine you would get in your Range Rover just to nip down the shops for a pint of milk. Am I right?
Yeah, there are Range Rovers outside my house, but none of them belong to me, I'm pleased to say. But then again, I'm really against any sort of piousness creeping into, or piety, I think is the word, creeping into this conversation, because I am an able-bodied, middle-class, professionally working, all those good things. My choices are really very wide when it comes to living car-free, and I agree with Alistair that some of the people who cannot live car-free are making some slightly unwise choices. But again, I think it's up to us. I mean, everyone's got their part to play, but our part to play is to make sure that when they make those unwise choices, which I don't think we have a democratic right to stop them doing, then we need to help mitigate the impact they have. Does that answer your question?
It does, thank you. And we're coasting into the last minute or so of this week's TTF conference. So it just really remains for me to say a big thank you to you three, a big thank you to Phil Blythe for joining us, squeezing a slot with us into his busy afternoon schedule.